So yeah, tell us a little bit about you, what you're about, that sort of thing.
I consider myself a punk poet. So I'm a poet from Yorkshire, and I'm in Manchester for university now. But I've been performing poetry for quite a while, so I won my first slam last year.
Oh, congrats.
Thank you. And a poetry competition, and it's kind of been picking up in the past couple of years, which has been quite exciting. So I was part of a collective in Hull called No Larkin About, because none of us liked Philip Larkin.
Okay.
So we performed in a few festivals, BBC's Contain Strong Language, Freedom Festival, just a few about in Hull. And then we all kind of went our separate ways when we went to uni. I still keep in touch with some of them, but now I'm more in the Manchester poetry scene. Okay. So I go to quite a few open mics, a few young identity workshops and stuff. So
interesting. Well, okay, so for those of our listeners who don't know, can you tell us what punk is, and specifically what punk poetry is?
Right, punk is different to everyone. For me, it's just living your truth and kind of... Wait, are we allowed to swear on this radio?
No, I should have said that.
Never mind. It's just kind of saying screw you to everyone who tries to put you into a box or try and define you. For me, punk has always been total freedom. And with punk poetry, it's kind of similar to punk music, I guess. It's a bit faster paced. There's a lot of rhythm, and it doesn't have to be overly, sophisticated. It's accessible. Okay, so if you think John Cooper Clarke poetry, lots of rhyme, lots of rhythm, a bit of humour in there as well. So usually punk poetry has a bit of wit to it.
It's shade to the rest of the genres of poetry. We're really witty. Okay, how did you get into that then?
Well, I've always been into punk. Since I was 15, I got into The Clash, and from there, I just kind of got obsessed with punk as a genre. I think especially as a South Asian, growing up in a predominantly white city, punk was kind of I don't know, it was sort of... I felt seen and I felt heard when I listened to punk music. That kind of anger and defiance as well. I really resonated with that. So then coming across bands like X-Ray Specs, these really kind of cool underground kind of bands in which women of colour were at the forefront, that kind of blew my mind a bit. And then I came across this band called Alien Culture, which was an all South Asian, apart from one token white guy, punk band from the 70s. And I was you hear about the Sex Pistols, you hear about the Clash,
that's what I was just about to say.
That is literally what I think about when I hear punk.
There's so many punk bands that have just kind of I don't know, history is just forgotten about in a sense.
Yeah, of course. Well, purposely erased, right?
Yeah, exactly. Punk has been a very whitewashed genre, and the reason I'm so interested in it is because it's not punk history is black and brown at its roots, to be honest. There's a band called Death in America that essentially started off the punk scene. There's a documentary on them on YouTube, actually. They're really amazing. I've just been fascinated by punk for so long.
Yeah, that's really interesting though that you say that, because when people who aren't into punk, when they think of punk, they do think of
Sex Pistols,
white bands, white culture, white people doing white music, and to say that actually the thing that got you into punk was that it helped you express yourself as a South Asian in a white area is actually really, I think, would make a lot of people question what they know and think about punk. But just a little bit more on that then, how do you think your racial, ethnic, cultural identity helped you kind of get into punk, and how punk then maybe helped you accept your identity a bit, or?
I mean, a lot of punk is just being angry at the government and establishments, I think, and
sounds like my kind of genre, doesn't it?
Yeah, so like
next week it'll be a purely punk playlist, guys.
You know what? I actually have like a punk of colours like playlist, which is just like POC, black punk bands. But yeah, like I've just been really fascinated by it, and I've been really fortunate to interview punk artists like Danny Denial, like upcoming punk artist from Seattle, I believe, and yeah, it's really cool just to see how many like South Asian punks there actually are.
So interesting, because like like someone who's not in that scene, just I would not have the foggiest about what's out there. Yeah, so
I only like last week before, I went to this event in London called Weirdo. So it was like it's a zine. So it was like the 2-year anniversary of it. And that just celebrates like South Asians and like alternative subcultures. So there were like goths and punks, and like the whole room was just filled with like brown alternative looking kids, and it was so cool to see so many people that look like me kind of in one space. And I led like a panel at that event. So I spoke to other South Asians in like the music industry, like Nadia Javid, who was in the Tuts. Now she's doing a lot of solo stuff. But yeah, it was really cool seeing. There was like a gallery, so people sent in their photos, and seeing like all these pictures of like South Asians like looking super like gothed up, which was really cool. So yeah, there's definitely spaces, but I think the representation of those spaces is mainly London centric. So I would like I would like to bring like a POC Punk Festival up north. There is Decolonise Fest, but again, that's in London. So yeah.
But we get people who have these kind of like very, very strong interests, and they're very kind of active in their field. A lot of the times they're Southerners, or like
they've moved
here, like, and it is because like being in London lends itself to being active in your areas of interest, because everything's in London and not much is in Manchester. And to be honest, that's part of like what our brand identity as Mango Masala like concertedly focuses on, is kind of like priding ourselves on like northern talent. So I do really do resonate with what you were saying there, but just kind of going back to what you were saying about like being South Asian and kind of being in punk, when you think of obviously like South Asian culture, sometimes it can be quite monolithic, in it, like
definitely
you think like, or when you think of like British South Asians like reclaiming their cultural identity, maybe you think of me like, you know, with jumka earrings and like a kurta, like right now it is kind of like the more stereotypical rendition. How did you find kind of stepping into yourself as a South Asian with punk in a way that people don't associate South Asian culture with?
I think just being your truest self, like especially with like poetry, like I don't like stray away from making South Asian specific references or using like a bit of my mother tongue in some of my poetry and stuff, like,
which is what, if you don't mind
Kannada.
Oh, okay, cool.
So my parents are from like Karnataka, South India. But yeah, like I don't know, like just being yourself, just taking up space in those kind of predominantly white spaces, especially in the UK, because like there are like bands and musicians out there who are South Asian, who are like in alternative scenes, but obviously they're not getting as much like recognition for their work.
Well, I mean, actually, you know what, I think, to be honest, the point of the question is that maybe it doesn't have to be such a concerted kind of thing to be a South Asian person in this space, because you don't have to think so much, you don't have to mold so much, you don't have to like the whole point of the space is just be yourself and be accepted.
No, that makes sense.